In every kingdom, there is a moment after the war ends, when the cheers fade, when the banners fall, and silence returns to the halls of power. That is where this story begins. A hero comes home, celebrated for saving a nation, believing his duty is done. But peace is never empty. Inside the palace, fear grows quietly. Choices are made behind closed doors, and a single decision, meant to protect, begins a chain of consequences that will echo for generations. This is not a story about glory. It is a story about what power demands, about love that must remain hidden, about loyalty tested when truth becomes dangerous. As empires rise and authority hardens, another path forms in silence, built on patience, discipline, and restraint. No banners, no speeches, only resolve. Some fight to rule, some fight to survive, and some fight so the future will not have to fight at all. This is a tale of family and legacy, of ambition sharpened into tyranny, and of resistance that grows not from rage, but from refusal. Because the greatest wars are not always fought on battlefields. They are fought in choices, in silence, in what we are willing to sacrifice, and what we are not. This is the story of a kingdom that learned that restraint can be stronger than conquest, and that legacy, once awakened, can never be buried again. The war ended without celebration. Mist drifted across the battlefield where broken banners lay silent. Soldiers stood still, too exhausted to cheer, too wary to believe it was over. The kingdom remained standing because one man had chosen restraint over glory. Adrian lowered his sword. Young for a general who had carried the fate of the realm, his armor bore scars earned not through recklessness, but patience. He had won by cutting supply lines, retreating when pride demanded advance, and sparing villages instead of burning them. Victory came quietly, and because of that it endured. When Adrian entered the capital, the city erupted. People knelt, wept, and showered him with flowers. The king named him defender of the realm before the court. Adrian bowed, uneasy beneath praise that felt heavier than battle. From the palace balcony, Princess Elena watched. She had known him before the war, reserved, disciplined, distant. Now she saw something deeper, a man shaped by loss rather than triumph. When their eyes met across the hall, neither smiled. No words passed between them, yet something unmistakable settled in the silence. Celebrations followed, but Adrian avoided them. Elena felt the same unrest. They met by chance in a quiet corridor in the gardens before dawn. Their conversations were cautious, bound by duty, filled with pauses they did not name. One evening, Elena asked him to walk with her. Moonlight washed the gardens in silver. They spoke of rebuilding, of soldiers who would never return. Silence grew warmer than words. At last, Elena turned to him, her voice barely steady. "I think of you more than I should." Adrian replied softly, "Then I should leave." She held his gaze and said one word, "Stay." And in that moment, love dared to exist, knowing it was forbidden, fragile, and already in danger. Elena tried to believe the night would pass like all the others. The palace slept beneath heavy silence as she stood at her window, watching the city lights flicker far below. Duty told her to turn away. Her heart refused. When Adrian arrived at her chamber door, neither of them spoke at first. Words felt dangerous now. They did not rush. Their closeness was careful, almost reverent, as if both understood this moment would never be repeated. When Adrian finally held her, Elena felt the weight of her title fade, replaced by something frighteningly human. For the first time in years, she was not a princess or an heir. She was simply a woman choosing truth over safety. They parted before dawn without promises. Weeks later, Elena felt the change in her body before the healer confirmed it. She listened without expression as the truth was spoken. A child. Adrian's child. Fear followed instantly, sharp and absolute. Discovery would destroy him. The court would show no mercy. She told only Lady Margaret, her closest friend, and Margaret's mother. When Prime Minister Thomas learned the truth, he chose loyalty without hesitation. Plans were made quietly. Elena was sent away under the guise of illness, far from curious eyes. On a storm-filled night, a boy was born. Elena held him once, memorizing his warmth, his breath, his fragile grip. Adrian stood nearby, his composure breaking only when the child cried. They named him Rowan. By morning, records were altered, servants dismissed. The truth was buried before it could breathe. Elena returned to the palace alone, but the crown felt heavier than ever, and the secret beneath it had a heartbeat. Fear entered the palace quietly. King Henry did not accuse, but his questions lingered too long. Why certain servants vanished? Why distant estates were sealed? Why Adrian's presence at court grew limited? Elena answered calmly, yet every word tightened the walls around her secret. Margaret urged patience. Her father believed the law still mattered. Elena wanted to believe them. But belief does not survive long inside a palace. Then Victor arrived. He came as a foreign prince bearing polished diplomacy and promises of stability. He spoke of unity, of strength through decisive rule, of a future without vulnerability. Elena listened carefully and heard certainty where others heard reassurance. Victor never asked about Adrian. That frightened her most. Late one night, Elena stood alone with a letter unsealed. She thought of Rowan hidden far away, of Adrian walking closer to danger with every unanswered question, of a crown that could either shield or destroy them both. Fear had made its choice. Elena wrote to Victor. She told herself power could protect what love could not. When the seal was pressed, something final settled in her chest. She did not know what the price would be, only that it would be paid by someone else. From that night forward, the palace no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room for blood. Victor's answer came swiftly. Alliance. Marriage. Order. The words were clean and precise, offering certainty where doubt had lived. Elena read the message twice, her hand drifting to the hidden locket beneath her gown. The last place Rowan's name still existed. King Henry fell ill before dawn. By midday, the bells rang. Physicians spoke of sudden failure. Elena stood at her father's bedside, her face calm as his breath faded. Alone later, her composure shattered, not for the king, but for the son she feared might follow him into death. The purge began before nightfall. Ministers vanished. Loyal voices were silenced. Prime Minister Thomas was accused of treason and executed without trial. Margaret's world collapsed in a single stroke. Elena signed decrees she did not read twice. Victor arrived not as a guest, but as a ruler already certain of obedience. The marriage was announced immediately. The crown passed without resistance. Fear replaced law. Adrian sensed it at once. Guards watched him too closely. Allies disappeared. When a wounded messenger reached him in secret, the truth was finally spoken. Orders had been given. That night, fire rose at the estate beyond the city. Steel cut through darkness as Adrian fled with Rowan, Margaret, and her mother. By dawn, the estate lay in ruins. Officially, the general and the child were dead. Elena wore black before the court. But behind the crown, a mother's fear had turned into something far worse, and there would be no turning back. The border was crossed before sunrise. Mist clung to the riverbanks as Adrian carried Rowan through shallow water, his grip steady despite exhaustion. Behind them, fires still glowed faintly on the horizon. Ahead lay a land that did not know their names and would never ask. Margaret walked beside him, her grief silent and contained. Her mother followed close, whispering prayers that felt more like promises than hope. The execution of Prime Minister Thomas had shattered the last illusion of safety. Nothing remained behind them but ashes and lies. In the neighboring land, Adrian became ordinary. He worked where strength was needed, spoke little, and never stayed long in one place. Rowan was known only as a quiet child whose mother had died young. When he asked questions, Adrian answered carefully, teaching patience before anger, discipline before strength. Years passed unevenly. Loss softened into companionship. Adrian and Margaret, bound by survival and trust, married without ceremony. Their home was small, their life quiet. When the twins were born, a boy and a girl, laughter returned cautiously, as if afraid to linger. Rowan grew watchful and intelligent. He learned maps, roads, and people. Adrian trained him in silence, never naming the past, never shaping the boy with hate. Margaret ensured warmth remained where fear had once lived. Across the border, the empire hardened. Elena ruled. Victor commanded. Fear replaced law. In exile, a family learned to breathe again, unnoticed, unnamed, and slowly preparing for a future they did not yet understand. Power did not soften Elena. It sharpened her. The merged empire moved quickly under Victor's command. Laws changed. Taxes rose. Soldiers replaced magistrates. Elena signed decrees without hesitation, her silence mistaken for mercy. Fear proved efficient. Victor fathered children openly. Among them rose Lucian, his firstborn, cold, brilliant, and patient. He believed order required certainty, and certainty required blood. Elena watched him grow without interference. Strength, she told herself, demanded hardness. Two others followed. Cashin, disciplined and calculating, learned to rule provinces with precision. Celine, fiercely loyal to her mother, mastered the bow and commanded soldiers who feared her calm more than rage. Together, they formed a new center of power, decisive, united, merciless. Lucian saw weakness where others saw family. Too many heirs meant fracture. Too many claims meant instability. One by one, his half-siblings died. Illness, accidents, quiet removals. Victor approved. Elena knew. She said nothing. The palace corridors grew silent. Tutors vanished. Rooms were sealed. Elena understood fully what she had allowed, and still she chose the crown. Blood, once spilled, demanded silence to justify itself. Far from the capital, Rowan trained beneath open skies. Adrian taught restraint as doctrine. The twins learned logistics and discipline. Margaret built networks of trust among villages that had forgotten fear. Two worlds moved in opposite directions, one toward control through terror, the other toward resistance through patience. And when they finally collided, neither side would recognize the kingdom they were fighting for. Adrian never called it a rebellion. He traveled quietly, under borrowed names, speaking only to those who had lost something under imperial rule. He asked no one to fight. He asked what they needed to survive. Food routes formed. Villages helped one another. Soldiers hesitated. Then he broke the fear carefully. Prison doors opened at night. Tax records burned without witnesses. Conscripts were redirected instead of rescued with blood. No revenge was permitted. Anyone who harmed civilians was removed immediately. Justice, Adrian insisted, must feel different from tyranny. Structure followed silence. Coordinators replaced commanders. Routes replaced ranks. Rowan learned discipline without glory. The twins carried messages, mapped roads, and memorized faces. Margaret organized shelter and care. No banners were raised. Years passed. When entire regions refused taxes at once, the empire noticed. Supply lines failed. Orders went unanswered. Victor demanded suppression. Lucian advised terror. The people called it breathing again. Only then did Adrian allow the truth to surface, not as a claim to power, but as proof that fear could be resisted. By the time the empire named him the enemy, the rebellion already belonged to everyone else. And that was why killing him would never be enough. The offer of peace arrived wrapped in ceremony. Seals were pressed. Envoys bowed. Words like stability and unity were spoken with care. Queen Elena insisted on one condition above all others. The rebel leader would attend the talks alone. His family, she promised, would be kept safe far from the table and the threat of steel. Adrian read the terms twice. He sensed danger in the confidence behind them, not in the words themselves. Still, he agreed. Time, he knew, could save lives even when truth could not. Quietly, he ordered contingencies and sent word to Rowan to keep routes clear. At the table, the truth surfaced. Victor listened as reports were laid bare, his disbelief barely concealed. The rebellion's architect was not a nameless agitator, but Adrian, the general respected and feared by neighboring kingdoms. Shock crossed Victor's face. Elena did not flinch. Inside, something fractured. She had sacrificed love and blood once for the crown. Now the crown demanded it again. Beside her stood Cassian and Celine, calm and unwavering. Together, they chose silence over mercy. The order was given without spectacle. In the line, in the future. Adrian sensed the shift before the words reached him. He rose as blades moved, cut his way free, and ran. He did not stay to finish Victor or Lucian. He ran toward his family. Miles away, Rowan was already fighting, overwhelmed by the Queen's soldiers pouring in waves. He held the line with discipline, buying moments with blood. The truce collapsed into fire, and every choice made at that table began to demand its payment. Adrian arrived as the world burned. Smoke curled through shattered ground where soldiers pressed in from every side. Rowan fought at the center, surrounded, his strikes precise but stretched thin by numbers. Margaret shielded the twins, refusing to flee while any path remained open. Adrian did not hesitate. He cut through the ranks with relentless focus, driving the attackers back step by step. He placed himself between steel and flesh, ordering Rowan to hold the rear while he cleared an escape. For a moment, it worked. Then the arrow flew. Celine stood at the ridge, calm and unmoved, her bow already drawn again. The shaft struck Adrian deep as he turned to shield Margaret. Pain exploded through him, sudden and final. He did not fall immediately. Believing the family finished, the soldiers ordered fire. Hundreds of burning arrows fell from the sky, igniting ground and shelter alike. Smoke swallowed screams. The attackers celebrated, convinced the line had ended. They were wrong. Rebel forces surged from the Trilene moments later, scattering the prince's soldiers and pulling survivors from the flames. The twins lived. Rowan lived. Margaret lived. Adrian did not. He sank to the ground, strength fading fast. Margaret knelt beside him, taking his hand. He looked once more at his children, safe, breathing, and exhaled. The general died undefeated. By dawn, word spread across the realm. The leader had fallen. The rebellion did not. It had inherited his resolve. Adrian's death did not end the rebellion. It completed it. Word moved faster than any proclamation. Villages that had hesitated opened their gates. Garrisons laid down arms without being asked. What had once been quiet resistance became shared resolve. Rowan did not claim command. He assumed it. He reorganized routes, secured supply lines, and reinforced discipline without speeches or ceremony. He punished cruelty swiftly and spared those who surrendered. Soldiers followed not because of his name, but because his decisions saved lives. Margaret remained at the center, steady and unbroken. The twins worked beside her, coordinating aid and evacuations. Grief became structure. Loss became law. In the capital, panic replaced confidence. Victor demanded suppression. Cashin urged consolidation. Celine prepared her archers again. Elena watched the reports pile higher, understanding at last that killing the general had not broken the rebellion. It had unified it. Rowan moved toward the capital without banners or songs. He cut the city off instead. Roads seized, water redirected, messages intercepted. Each day drained resolve from within the walls. At dawn on the seventh day, Rowan sent a single message to the gate. Open it. This ends without fire. The gates opened, and for the first time since tyranny began, the Empire faced judgment without fear to hide behind. The throne hall felt vast without Lucien. Victor stood at its center, armor gleaming, fury barely contained. Around him, commanders shifted as reports arrived, garrisons surrendering, towers opening, streets falling silent instead of erupting. The capital had chosen an ending without fire. Rowan entered on foot. He carried no banner. His sword remained lowered. The crowd parted instinctively, not in fear but recognition. Victor laughed once, sharp and hollow, and charged. The clash was brutal and brief. Victor fought with raw strength and rage, striking wildly, demanding domination. Rowan absorbed the blows, waited, and moved with discipline learned over years of restraint. When the opening came, he struck once, clean, decisive. Victor fell at the foot of the throne he had ruled through fear. Silence followed. Elena watched from the steps, her face unreadable. Celine's hand tightened on her bow, then stilled as guards surrounded her. Rowan did not raise his blade again. "It's over," he said. Outside, bells rang, not in mourning but release. Soldiers laid down arms. Citizens stepped into the streets without being ordered. Victor was dead, yet Rowan felt no triumph. He looked east, toward the road Lucien had taken, and understood the lesson his father had lived by. Tyranny does not always die where it stands. Sometimes it runs. Rowan entered the ruined courtyard, carrying his father's ancestral war sword. The blade had guarded the realm through generations of siege and revolt, drawn only when the kingdom stood at the edge of ruin. Adrian had wielded it once without pride. Rowan drew it now with reverence. Across the stones, the queen's children stepped forward. Prince Cashin advanced first, his expression cold, blade steady. Opposite him, Rowan's twin brother moved into place, silent and composed. At the far side, Princess Celine lifted her bow, eyes fixed and unblinking. Rowan's twin sister stepped forward to meet her, unafraid. Style. Cashin attacked with precision and power, striking to dominate. The twin met him blow for blow, refusing ground, matching strength with discipline. Their blades locked, sparks flashing, neither yielding. Cashin lunged again, certain. The twins stepped inside the strike and ended it. Cashin fell without ceremony. At the same moment, Celine released arrow after arrow. The twin girl closed the distance, forcing Celine to abandon her bow and draw steel. Their fight was swift and merciless, hatred against purpose, ambition against resolve. When the final strike landed, Celine collapsed to the stone. Silence crashed down. From the steps of the throne, Queen Elena watched her children lie still. The power she had chosen over love answered her at last, not with victory, but with loss she could never undo. Rowan lowered the ancestral sword. The twins returned to his side, uncelebrated, unseen, undeniable. Blood had answered blood, and the crown waited for judgment. Lucien returned to a kingdom that no longer belonged to him. He crossed the eastern river with mercenary banners raised and gold-heavy wagons behind him, prepared to reclaim a throne he believed chaos had left vacant. His plan was precise: enter as a savior, restore order, rule what remained. The land did not answer. Villages closed their gates. Roads stood empty. Messengers vanished. When scouts finally returned, their news was brief and devastating. Victor was dead. Cashin was dead. Celine was dead. The capital had fallen without burning. Lucien laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Then I will take it back. He never reached the gates. Rowan met him on open ground beneath a sky stripped of banners. The rebellion stood behind the new king, not in ranks of fear, but disciplined silence. Margaret and the twins watched from a distant rise. Lucien fought brilliantly, refusing to accept an ending. He struck with speed and cruelty, every movement shaped by ambition rather than duty. Rowan fought with control, the ancestral sword steady in his grip. The duel stretched on. In the end, Lucien faltered, not from weakness, but disbelief. He could not understand a power that did not rely on terror. Rowan struck once. Lucien fell where his ambition had led him, unmourned and unremembered. Mercenaries fled. Gold spilled into the dirt. The last heir of tyranny was gone, and the long night ended where it had begun, with restraint. The coronation was quiet. No trampit soundeth. No banners demandido. The people gathered because they wished to see the end of fear made real. Rowan stood before the throne without armor, the ancestral war sword resting beside him. Not raised, not displayed, but present. When the crown touched his head, it felt lighter than any before it. Not because it carried less power, but because it carried less terror. Margaret stood near him, grief held steady by purpose. The twins stepped forward at Rowan's signal and were named openly at last. The twin son was appointed warden of the realm, charged with guarding borders and training soldiers to defend rather than dominate. The twin daughter was named High Justiciar, entrusted with restoring courts, reopening records, and ensuring law answered to truth. These were not rewards. They were responsibilities. The first decrees were simple. No purges, no inherited punishment, no rule by fear. Councils were restored. Villages sent representatives who were listened to. Former rebels returned home as citizens. Former soldiers laid down arms without shame. Across the realm, order returned without cruelty. Elena was taken far from the capital to a stone keep by the sea. She wore no crown and commanded no voice. Memory would be her sentence. As seasons turned, children were born into a kingdom that spoke of Adrian not as legend, but as principle. His name became law rather than monument. Restraint over rage, duty over pride, protection over power. The realm, once guarded by a sword, learned to stand by balance. And it endured.